My name is Jennifer Christian, Jenny, as everybody knows me. I'm the Farming Projects Manager at Farming Falmouth. I'm a founding member, I've been president, I've been vice president, and now I just get to do what I'm good at, which is grow food. Thank God. So co-teaching is always one of my favorite ways to do things. I don't know everything, and I will never tell you I do. Usually I have Warren Collins and Kathy Setta, who are both master gardeners and educated in their own right. This year I'm lucky enough to teach with Russ Norton, and I'll have him kind of give himself an overview of.
Sure. So my name is Russ Norton. I work for Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, which is Education and Research Department of Barnstable County, and also for UMass Extension, Landscape Nursery and Urban Forestry Program. And so I work with industry professionals, so farmers, landscapers, arborists, you name it, providing them technical expertise. As part of that technical expertise, I tend to focus on integrated pest management, which we'll talk a little bit about today. What else do I want to say?
Can you say your name again?
Russell Norton, N-O-R-T-O-N. I'll throw my email up here so if you want to reach out to me. So I work with a lot of industry professionals, but I also oversee the training of the master gardeners on Cape Cod and some of their program activities. And yeah, that's who I am. I love doing everything plants. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a lot of great information to share with you all.
Awesome. The thing about this workshop is it would be better if we were outside. It would be better if we were in a greenhouse, hands-on. Great if we had a big slideshow and lots of pictures, but the idea is to get you in your own space, in your own garden when we're talking, and thinking about your planning, your sunlight, your diet preferences, right? Because we're not all going to want to plant the same things. We don't all have the same light resources. We don't all have the same circumstances. So we can show you pictures of stuff, but it's our stuff, and it's like, you know. But the pest and disease photos are always the most helpful thing. But the idea is that start to finish, how do you plan your garden, start your seeds, and get your soil where it needs to be to make all of that effort worth it? And so we bring the seed catalog out because Jony's is an employee-owned research organization. It's a farm research organization that is employee-owned, meaning that their interests are for farmers and the environment thereof. And so they're a wealth of resources, and their website and their catalog you could learn to farm from in a lot of ways. They have the nifty charts that tell you when, if you wanted lettuce almost all season long, you could look at Jony's and they have laid out your lettuce program and the different types of lettuce that say thrive in or can handle more heat and can maybe get you through a little bit of that early summer. And some, so we love Jony's. There's many other seed catalogs, but the educational bits about this one is why we're giving you it. So it's not about a loyalty thing as much as it's about, I feel like it's an educational resource.
There's a lot of information packed in there. I also brought a whole bunch of other seed catalogs, just so you can kind of scan through them. Maybe if we take a break or something, or at the end, just to see what else is out there. And maybe you can just take down the names and reach out to them.
Most of them send them for free. They're happy to have you get a catalog.
For sure.
Always the place to start is soil. Now, Russ was trained well before me in agriculture and has been through the realms of farming, right? The Green Revolution, the chemicals, the tractors, the tillage. And I'm on the other side over here in this new agey permaculture, no-till, regenerative space. But having said that, what we're learning about soil right now is incredible. And the more we learn, the more the tenets that I'm about to teach you make sense. And it's complicated science, I would say, very complicated science. And they're still getting there with it. But what they're discovering is important. And I'm gonna not dumb it down, but simplify it and connect it to nature, because everybody can observe nature, and if you can see a clear example of what is good and works, you can connect that to your soil in your garden. So I always ask people, when you go out into the forest, or when the last time you went out into the forest to play was, and you kind of get into that leaf litter in the woods, have you ever dug down and scooped that out and like felt like what forest soil feels like, smells like, squeezes like? That is like what we're going for. Not 100%, but that's like my example of like the color, like just that's it. Because who's out there managing the forest? Watering it, weeding it, where's the nutrients getting sprayed on? Like who's fertilizing the forest?
Itself, yeah. The leaves, the leaves fall and then they decompose, and that whole process is what builds that layer.
And that happens over time, right? Upward. And that is critical, right? So organic matter is a lot of what we talk about. When you want to build your soil, you're starting to add more organic matter. That's like step one. Get more organic matter in the soil. I feel like there's a million things to say about that. So in the forest, you have all these different types of species, right? It's not just an oak forest most of the time. It's a mixed forest, which means minerals, nutrients are not just one type. And the thing that happens is they all fall to the ground. They keep the soil covered, right? Which means a lot of weed seeds, a lot of things that could come up. They tend to come up in disturbed areas next to forests, right? Once you see a disturbed area next to a forest, you just see what? Invasives, weeds come up, because they're just sitting there waiting. They're just waiting to be like flipped up and shown the light, because a lot of weed seeds and aggressive roadside weeds are light germinated, right?
Yep.
Do you have anything to add? Because I could keep going.
So, thinking a lot, I think about soil a little bit differently. I think of it in like these kind of three spheres that overlap, and so we attribute these three spheres to different parts. So I think about this, what we call the physical sphere, the chemical sphere, and then the biological sphere. Mm-hmm. And that biological piece is a lot of what Jenny's talking about, but we also look at that physical sphere, which is driven by soil texture, which is a part of, here on the Cape, it's part of our geological history. And so our soils are very unique on Cape Cod. So I always like to ask this question when I'm talking about soil to a new group. And the question is, like how old do you think Cape Cod is geologically, right? So I always offer out these options, right? 2 million years, 200 million years, 20,000 years, and 200,000 years. Whoa. Who thinks that Cape Cod is geologically 2 million years old? How about 200 million years? How about 200,000 years? 20,000 years. So yeah, the answer is 20,000 years. So Cape Cod has not been around for a long time, right? It was created when the last glacier left, and it left behind what we call glacial till. And that glacial till is full of all different kinds of materials, rocks and sand and stone. And then as it left, what happens to the glacier? It also left so those kettles, and we call it kettle and cam topography, were actually where ice chunks were left in the glacial till. And then when they melted, they left deposits. A cam, a rise, is where there was actually a hole in the glacier and sediment melted into that hole and causing a buildup. And so we have that kind of topography. But so as that glacier melted, it distributed a lot of those materials in water, right? So if you think about shaking up a glass with sand or stone in it, what happens? The heaviest materials fall out first, and then the finer materials get brought further out. And that's why we're left with so much sand here on Cape Cod, is because the sand fell out of that melt water really fast. So everyone says Cape Cod is one big sand dune. Not true at all. It's one big outwash plain because it is literally the meltwater from the glacier that deposited our soils, which from a soil health perspective, maybe not the greatest soils because they're very sandy. But that's why we try to improve that piece with some organic matter.
That's so, like, this is why I love co-teaching. I always learn something too.
Nice.
And you brought up the mineral component of of soil, right? And a lot of times we would do that, right? Where we would take some of our soil and we put it in a jar with water and we'd shake it and we just let it sit. And you'll see sort of your sedimentary layers. It'll tell you sort of your percentages of sand, silt, and clay. And in that geological process, right, we were given this glacial moraine. You've heard that term? It's that nice ribbon of soil we get from Bourne, Falmouth, a little bit into Sandwich.
So the moraine technically is where, if you take Route 6 and then there's another one kind of coming down MacArthur's Boulevard, they're like jumbled piles of all that material. They're kind of like where the glacier stalled and they acted kind of like a bulldozer, kind of pushing sediments, but then also like a conveyor belt. So if you can imagine the glacier standing in one spot, but then moving and depositing soil. So we have these two areas where you'll find a lot of rocks in the soil along those two areas. Mm-hmm. And then everywhere else almost on the Cape is an outwash plain. So the best soils in the Upper Cape are kind of in between those two moraines, the kind of Route 28 and Route 6, because there were a lot of wind-blown deposits that landed on top of the outwash plain, giving us some of our actual loamy soils that you have in Falmouth.
We're pretty lucky in Falmouth, soil-wise, considering the rest of the Cape, which I really appreciate, because what does sandy soil do? Like, I mean, water just goes right through it, right? I mean, nutrients, bacteria, mycelium, it's really hard to establish when just drying out, rinsing out. It's the other components are necessary, and your ideal combination gives you a really nice soil. It's like what farmers wish they always had, right? But every soil, we planted the apple orchard over at Tony Andrews' farm, and every hole we dug was different. It was unbelievable. It's in one straight line, but every hole had a different sort of mix-up in those inches that we had dug. And so it just goes to show you how variability there is with these things. Things you can do for increasing your organic matter. Compost, right, is number one. It's the way we always go about things. I am a heavy user of compost. I will always start the compost conversation with, please look into your composter and their methods and their inputs. The dump is great. The compost is useful for some things, but it's not properly heated. The weed seeds and who knows what herbicides and chemicals you're pulling in and bringing into your vegetable garden. So if we're talking about vegetables here, please find good compost that is ideally tested and of a quality that you can find out. Just because there's more persistent chemicals they're finding in compost and manures now that are killing gardens for 5+ years because the chemicals that are sprayed on let me make sure I get this right, the grasses are getting eaten by horses, and it's still coming out so toxic in the compost that once the compost is supposedly ready and laid out, it's still actively killing plant life. So I want you to be careful. This isn't a scare tactic. There are plenty of good composters. Like, you're good. But just trust the town's compost in places that you don't intend on eating from. I'd say your hydrangeas, your rhododendrons, cool. But just know you're going to get a ton of weeds. Yeah. And you're not going to get the best weeds that are easy to manage. So careful.
There is a certifying agency for compost called the U.S. Compost Council, so you can always look for their seal of approval, which means that they're using certain feedstocks and doing certain testing. You had a question?
Well, I was wondering where you would buy your compost. Where around here do you feel is a good company to buy some compost? Your recommendations.
I'll say that the best compost you can do is your own compost. So if you're not a composter now, I would encourage you to start composting, because then you have control over all the ingredients going into there. So after that, I generally don't make suggestions about retailers, but shop around, look at it, see if they have a test on hand as well.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a novice, but when you're making your own compost, what about putting your own scraps and all that? Because I'm afraid of, rats and mice coming, animals in my yard.
Yeah. It's a concern.
So try to keep anything with oils, fats, grease out of it. So it's generally yard clippings. And then, when you're preparing vegetables and stuff, you want to keep meats, greases, oils, and fats out of it. But everything else can be composted and won't be that attractant to things like rats, which sometimes like compost. Eggshells are okay, yeah. Yep. And if you found you had a problem, then you can just stop adding eggshells if you found critters were going after them. Sometimes crows will go after eggshells, things like that.
Yeah. Farming Falmouth has a new farm, which I will tell you more about our events and us a little bit towards the end. But one of the things that we keep talking about is we're planning on showing people how to make compost in a bigger setting. But then I'm thinking about y'all and home composters, and there's like 6 different ways to do that. There's this little gadget, there's this tumbler, there's this type of So I think we're trying to organize so that we have examples of all of those, well managed, so that people could kind of come and see like the different types of compost, and we could talk about the pros and cons, because everybody's yard and situation's different. So some composters just work for people and some don't. So I agree, starting to make your own compost is the best place to.
Is this a good time for questions?
I kind of like popcorning, because if you lose a question and you don't feel like you got it answered, that will be bad, right?
So online, I've seen a lot of people doing a colander in the ground with
A lid?
something on top, but that looks to me like one meal's worth of food. And so, is your experience that will break down fairly quickly, or is that?
It's kind of incredible how fast worms and bacteria break stuff down. I'm always shocked. I mean,
Do you recommend getting more worms? Like, I've also seen some people who get worms in the mail for adding to their compost pile.
So generally the idea behind compost is that the fastest compost creates heat through the process. The organisms create heat, and earthworms don't like that heat. So they can be a good part of what we would call cold composting, but the cold composting takes a lot longer period of time. So that's kind of like the stagnant pile in your backyard where you keep adding stuff.
Yeah.
You can add earthworms to that, but you wouldn't want to necessarily into a heated compost pile.
Not all earthworms are the same. Is the red regular worm that you see on Amazon satisfactory for Cape Cod?
That is usually the one that is used for composting. It is the red wigglers.
Yeah.
So if you were doing composting with earthworms, it's called vermicomposting, and so you would use red wigglers, yeah.
that's what I do in the winter. I have a worm bin in my basement that I give small scraps to throughout the season. I have an outside compost too, but I keep my worms going because I soak them and drench them and make a beautiful fertilizer tea usually in the spring, because that vermicompost worm poop is one of the best things in the world for soil for lots of reasons.
Yeah, great amendment if you
The
got
great
it.
amendment. If you wanted your own fertilizer, having a worm bin around is a way to do that. They're leachate, right? So if you just soaked that wormy, poopy soil that they had made all winter in water and just drained it like a tea bag almost, worm tea, that is killer fertilizer. That is like your fish emulsion level stuff. So there's lots of ways to improve your own soil, and liquidates are a good thing if you can't necessarily make a ton of compost. a liquidate is a nice thing to add. You could take worm tea and spread it out on your soil, and it will help with the texture and all the sorts of things. But one thing I like to make sure we talk about is the mulch layer of, say, a forest, right? Because when I think of building soil and organic matter, we add compost, but I also mulch everything, like there's leaves on the forest floor. If it's not covered in plants or mulch, I find weeds come automatically, right? Like I said earlier about like a disturbed space, weeds love it. And honestly, weeds are so important. Weeds are the scab of the planet. It's not a good visual. But it covers the soil, which means it keeps it where it is, right? We all know about the Dust Bowl, and that bad farming caused all of that, right? We're gonna not try and do that again, but keeping the soil covered is that important step. Thinking about Nebraska right now, I'm just like, so soil needs to be covered to encourage worms, right? And so I find that you don't need to bring worms in. I've never brought earthworms in, but one season with cardboard and wood chips, and they are there. Actually, within 2 days, I swear to God, they are there, and they do some amazing work. I think they're Employee of the Month almost every month with just how much they do. So I'll explain a little bit of our bed prep, because it's very specific to our no-till style. We broad fork a lot, so we don't till. We never have a machine come in except once at the beginning, and that's not even where the plants are growing. We only rototill to make shoveling easier for the volunteers. So that we only rototill the walkways, which then get backfilled with wood chips, and the bed space only gets fluffed. So we stand on these giant spikes, and it's this big bar, which I should have brought, and it breaks up the hard pan in the soil, and you lean back a little bit, and you just fluff. You know what they're any of our volunteers have probably been on the broad fork a few times. And the fluffing, and then you back up and you do another foot back and you just fluff all the way back. And if you add a layer of compost on top of that and you wait, the worms do this amazing dance up and down because you've just put dinner on top for them. And you've opened up all of that hard space they were having to like really work hard through. You've made air and you've made water infiltration so much easier. And next time it rains, that compost is gonna get trickled into all of those spaces that you just opened up. And that creates this great mixing of soil without you having to come in and do it, right? It saves you time. Worms are Employee of the Month, I'm telling you. And then we plant and then we mulch. We do a lot of live plants, so we do direct seeding, but we do a lot of live plants because the way our garden works is we are planting again right after we harvest a crop, and we are intercropping. So each bed has multiple things growing in it all the time, and there's always a plant going in as another plant is coming out. And so it's either covered in a plant growth and a mulch, or just really low plants that don't allow the sunlight to go. I'm going to talk about intercropping a little bit.
Do you want to talk about what you use for mulches?
Yes, because there's so many mulches. Thank you, Russ. Do you want to talk about mulches?
A little bit.
Yeah.
So there's all different types of mulches that you can use. But think about your own resources that you have on your own property for the mulches that you can choose. So the use of leaves works really well as a mulch, just like it does in the forest. So, if you're out there raking leaves off your lawn, well, save those. Don't bag them up and send them to the transfer station. That is a perfect mulch resource. And the same goes with things like pine needles. Generally, we would encourage you, if you have a lawn, to return your lawn clippings to the grass. But if you are collecting them, that can be used as a mulch if there's no herbicides used on that lawn. So think about what you have locally instead of other options like hay. They have to be brought in, and it's really hard to find high quality mulches like straw locally.
Russ, when it comes to pine needles, do they add acidity to your soil?
No, so there's a lot of myths out there that kind of just get repetitive through history. So the idea that oak leaves or pine needles, when they break down, create a lower pH is not true. They do release weak acids when they break down, but they don't change soil pH. So they don't make it more acidic.
If you're into a new garden space, should you have your soil tested?
I would say always.
Yeah, recommended.
Always. So.
Especially if you don't know the land use history. I mean, there was orchards sprayed with arsenic back in the day, and you know, the soil's still contaminated to this day. So it's important to, like, if you're on a new piece of property or if you're in an urban area, especially.
And how does one do that?
I would encourage you to use UMass. So UMass has a soil testing lab. They do primarily a chemical analysis. And so that gives you pH, and then also a bunch of nutrients, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, a whole bunch of micronutrients, potentially lead and aluminum, which can be contaminants. So a pretty good place to start. They don't do like a soil texture test, so that would be something you'd have to do. There's a bunch of guides where you can do that by feel and whatnot.
With the results, do they give you any suggestions?
They give you recommendations for fertilization and liming. Yep.
And they usually spell it out in a way that you can understand as a homeowner, not like a technical. They try and make it understandable for you.
Yeah.
You send it to you, is that how you do it?
To UMass. If you go, just Google UMass Soil Lab.
Okay.
Take you right to the page, get the instructions, get the form, walks you through how to even take a soil test, which I would say is probably the most important part of doing a soil test, is taking the sample correctly so you get back useful information. So, but yeah, check it all out. If we have time, maybe we can talk about it at the end a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing about Cape Cod, we got some really awesome mulch here that just blows in and like is coming on the waves. So seaweed, awesome. People worry about it being salty. If it is up on the beach and you feel like picking it up, it's been rinsed. Like it's probably been there and been rained on during the storm that brought it up. And a lot of time it's been rinsed enough and it's dry enough so you can take it. That's probably not going to be soaked with salt water. Should be.
When do you add the seaweed to the garden cover? Spring and fall?
Whenever you have the energy to go get it and you can find it. Like all year long, I have a bucket in my truck in case I come along a small pile of seaweed. Like I'm trying to get it all the time in little bits and bobs if I can, because I mean, I like go to the beach on Friday nights with my kid and I'm going home with seaweed. Small amount, but like I have small little gardens, but I also have giant fields. So it's like wherever you can sneak that in, because I mean, the nutrients in the ocean, the minerals in the ocean, just like the things you're adding to your soil, the more diversity of your mulches as well, the better. And leaves you can go too thick with. Sorry, what'd you say?
Rotting trees, because we have a bunch of fallen trees right now.
Yeah, arborist chips would work as well. You know,
Wood chips are great.
Wood chips are a good source as well. So.
A lot of people worry about wood chips taking nitrogen too, and I mean, it is a true thing that when you have a high carbon piece of wood, it wants to pull in nitrogen from the surrounding soil. But if you age those chips in the pile before you use them, a year, they're fine. Yeah. I even go ahead and if I can't age them and I'm putting them in the garden, I'll take fish emulsion and a watering can and I will give them something.
So the key thing about wood chips and the nitrogen tying up piece is that you don't want to incorporate your wood chips into the soil. So when they're a layer on the top, very little of that occurs. But if you get into a situation where you put wood chips on and then you till your soil and you get all the wood into the soil, then the microorganisms that are trying to break that down will tie up your nitrogen. So that's where you would have to do some. So don't till the wood into the ground. Just use it as a mulch on top of the ground.
There's a permaculture technique called hugelkultur. It's a German type method. Yeah. If you ever wanted to make some of that wood disappear and create a garden, you can basically arrange your logs and sticks and stuff in a way. A lot of times they dig them down, put the big stuff, like whole logs in the bottom, and you just different size sticks and material and mulches and soils kind of layered in a mound, and over time they break down like that. But at first you have a pretty big, tall space, and then it'll start to sink. But you probably won't have to water or do much to that for a long time, because those stored nutrients are breaking down so slowly and at different speeds. There's so much going on. The idea is that you get a lot from kind of putting that. It's a permaculture thing, so a lot of times it's with perennials. So you'd plant some trees or some bushes on top of it, and as the nutrients really sink in, and it's like just a bank for you to use later. But not really in the garden for big stuff.
What do you guys
Mulches.
use for mulches?
We buy straw, and it is not cheap. And the thing is we utilize every little bit of it. Like right now in the spring, we're raking it, and it's like breaking into little pieces, and we're still putting it back because it's valuable to us. And it's that little layer, it does matter. Like we have peas in right now, and we even just sprinkled that fine last year's hay over the middle just to give it a little. We buy in straw because it's the thing we can find the most. I wouldn't ever recommend hay because it's got a lot of weed seeds. Like it's just full of weed seeds. I mean, no, it's nutrients for the animals that would eat it, right? It's good because it's a feed stock. But straw is just the sticks of harvested grain, the stems of harvested grain.
So I'll say one other piece. We often see what is called mulch hay on the market, and mulch hay is usually hay that is of low quality, so it can't be fed to animals. Do not use mulch hay, because mulch hay has more weeds in it than hay does. And so you really want to look for straw, all right? And you can always inspect the materials. So, if you go to your local grain store and you're looking at the straw, make sure that you don't see tons of seed heads in there, because that will potentially be a crop of weeds that you're spreading on there.
It's the opposite thing you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yep.
So I talked a little bit about no-till, compost, and mulch. And so our methods, and I talked a little bit about the walkways. We have like a 1 foot deep trench of wood chips in between every 3 foot bed, or 30-inch beds. So we have 30-inch beds, foot of chips, 30-inch bed, foot of chips. And we have 60 of those beds, and that is like our main service garden. I try and keep the service garden super low tech. Like I'm not using anything fertilizer or amendment-wise that you can't access. That felt really important to me as a teaching tool, because I don't want you to be like, well, I can't get that. How can I like follow along and grow along with you if I can't even utilize those same practices? So intercropping is a huge piece of what we do. One thing about being in our garden and our farm is I want people to feel like it is more of the farm isn't in an ecosystem. The farm is part of the ecosystem. And so we're not trying to just be a postage stamp of farming within the world around it. We want to be stewards to the rest of the environment around us in an ecological way. So we don't want to use pesticides. We don't want to use herbicides. And I've never even felt the need to since we've really gotten the garden established. We don't have weeds, and everybody's a little shocked when they come. The weeding takes like an hour a week max, and it's a big space. And it's because of all these techniques we've been explaining. But the intercropping and the integrated pest management helps us avoid those things. I feel like you should talk about integrated pest management,
Sure.
and then I can talk about sort of the ways we implement it on our garden.
So has everyone heard of integrated pest management before?
Yes.
So it's kind of a process, a series of science-based steps to intervene with managing different pests. And there's some classic steps that are important to understand. So When I talk about IPM, we usually start talking about the steps. And the first step is usually monitoring. All right, so what is monitoring? It's actually being out in your garden or on the farm space or in your landscape, looking at what's going on, like observing, all right? Because as you observe things, you can then go to the second step and identify potential pests, all right? So you monitor, you're out there, you're looking around, you're observing things, looking closely at your plants, and then maybe you find something. Maybe you find a bunch of aphids on your plants, right? So then you have to go through that process of identifying what the pest is, right? So you identify the pest, which if you need help doing that, the master gardeners run a horticulture clinic, and you can send them pictures, and they'll help you go through that process. So we do the proper ID, which can be tricky. A lot of times, things that go wrong with plants aren't always driven by pests. A lot of times they're driven by environmental conditions. And so there's a lot of misdiagnosis potentially there. So we have proper identification, monitoring. Then we have this thing called thresholds. And the idea of a threshold is basically just the determination of separating what is just a nuisance and what is actually causing a problem. I work a lot with folks in the commercial industries. And when you work with a commercial farmer whose livelihood is coming from farming, their thresholds are driven by what?
Profit.
Economics, right? Economics, because they kind of have to be. In a home garden, economics typically aren't the primary driver. So I often look at it from a plant health perspective or a yield perspective. Is this pest going to cause this plant to die or reduce yield? And so those that are, you need to then do something about it. And when we get to control tactics in IPM, it's usually the fourth step, we always look at cultural things that we can do. And I think Jenny's going to talk a lot about, and has already talked about, some of those cultural things, which is like good soil, right? Good soil is going to provide you a healthy plant that can better defend itself. And so we start with cultural things, then biological options. And biological options includes things like diversity, but might also include having a lot of pollinator habitat right near your vegetable garden, because a lot of good insects that eat other insects also require pollen and nectar resources. So you can have those resources near your garden. And then in the traditional IPM category, then there would also be the last intervention, which would be, in many cases, if it had to come to it, a chemical intervention. And then the last step is an evaluation. What worked? What didn't work? And this is a great time of year to think about your garden from last year, think about what pests you might have had, and how you're going to manage them this year using cultural options.
I think cultural options are the best, right? And you were telling me, like, with things like row cover, right? That's cultural, right? You're stopping the predators from getting, so flea beetles, right? In the spring, those little shotgun-looking leaves that looks like it blown little pebbles and just got blown out. Those are flea beetles, and they come out of the woods in the spring off the leaf litter, and they bounce over, and you go and they jump when you come. Those things, a cultural habit to get into would be when you plant your eggplant and stuff that's very susceptible to flea beetles, you cover them with a row cover or an insect net.
So I'll pass this around so you can kind of see what an insect net looks like. And so it's pretty straightforward, but a lot of the insects that you deal with in your garden fly to your crop to lay eggs and then start feeding. So all you literally have to do is put a barrier between your crop and where those insects are to avoid that problem. And so, the floating row fabric, if you grow any brassicas, are people familiar with brassicas? This is cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, all those. They have at least 4 caterpillar pests in our area: the imported cabbage worm, the cross-striped cabbage worm, the cabbage looper, and the diamondback moth. They fly to those plants, they lay eggs on it, and then those eggs turn into caterpillars that feed on your plants. So literally all you have to do is put the insect screening over those plants, and then they can't lay the egg on it. and you end up with nice, clean produce.
Anything to avoid the chemical sprays, right? Especially in your home garden. We're not trying to get crazy. And I think I haven't had to really spray. The flea beetles were probably the only thing I sprayed for last year, because we just didn't have the budget to get the netting, and I'm really excited for it this year.
Yeah.
So that'll be a whole new thing for our gardeners to experience with us. So in our garden, I always tell this story about integrated pest management because it is like a shining example of why I do it and how I know it works and why I trust it. Rather, because I come from a profit farming background. That's how I know Russ. I was commercially farming, and he would come and help us spot pests and figure out what to do and help us try and grow organic corn, which felt like the silliest, most uphill battle in the world. But the things we do in our garden is we plant aromatic pest confusers and pollinator plants in sort of diagonals and crosses so that everywhere an insect might go, they're just like, they have marigold smells happening and onions interplanted with stuff to deter certain pests from certain crops. And that's where the intercropping really comes into an integrated pest management concept. So we put in Alyssium and marigolds as pollinator plants, and that's not necessarily in the fields, it's on the ends, but then in the fields, our beds, say they're 30 inches, we'll plant onions on the outside, and then you have room on the inside for crops that are more susceptible to things that the onion might be able to confuse the pest for. The example's not coming up. Is it brassicas?
Yeah,
Onion,
it would work with brassicas.
So, and it's worked pretty well for us so far. And the aphids are the example I always point to. So 2 years in a row, I've had a major infestation in our red Russian kale, just the red Russian kale, to the point where I thought I was going to lose 4 whole beds of kale. So that's 8 rows of kale. We were sending hundreds of bunches a week to the service garden. I was starting to freak out. Because I know I'm like, at this point, I might have to do something. I have to either act or I'm going to lose all of it, right? Death was near. And then I started to spot ladybug larvae. And because I know what that looks like, I got real excited. I yelled and hollered at the volunteers. I said, come quick. You guys got to know what this looks like because I can't have you squishing it. Come here. And then every time you see one of these, we're going to take it and we're going to bring it over here to the red Russian kale. And so I had people going and doing this and spotting bugs. So they were doing the monitoring with me as we're picking and as we're doing stuff, because 2 years in a row, those ladybugs brought that kale back from the brink. And I ended up with fall harvested kale because it came back. And it was incredible to watch a few larvae one day, the next day a few larvae, and then, there's an adult, I see her, okay, cool, she's here. And they just started to come and mature and pupate and do their thing, and then I couldn't believe it. Within 3 weeks, it had flipped. Patricia?
I just wanted to say I witnessed that. It literally was, after 2 weeks, there was a dramatic difference. It was extraordinary.
Probably my favorite cartoon is this little kid looking at a ladybug, and it's like, oh mom, look at the ladybug, and then they zoom in on a magnifying glass, and it's biting the heads off of aphids and going, die, you evil aphids, and it's just everybody thinks the ladybug is this sweet little cool, and it's down there but it really does. I was so impressed, and it made it so I had to do less work. Nature figured it out. The balance was brought back, and we got to just not worry about what we had to spray. How awesome, right? Yeah?
Is this something you can do to attract ladybugs?
Plants. So habitat, right? So what do they eat? What do they like? What do they like to pupate? Some host plants for certain bugs. They like to lay on certain things, right?
Yeah, I would think about the goals of a pollinator garden are generally to have floral resources, a diversity of floral resources, available all the time. And it's really neat how a lot of predatory and parasitoid insects of some of our pests also frequently require nectar resources for a specific part of their life cycle. So just having that year-round abundance and diversity of flowering near your garden space is going to help with that biological control. I'll say that alyssum is probably one of the best ones if you've ever had aphid issues, because there's a fly that is particularly attracted to alyssum called a syrphid fly or a hover fly. They often look like bee mimics sometimes. And their larvae, they feed off the alyssum flowers, the nectar, but their larvae are these little maggots that their eggs are laid in populations of aphids, and then those larvae just go through, and just like the bird bugs, the larvae of these syrphid and hoverflies destroy aphid populations. So one of the simplest things you can do, and this is done even in big scale California and Arizona lettuce fields, is they plant like alyssum every 100 plants or so. But you can do it like every 3 or 4 plants and get even better control. So really think about using alyssum.
I've had a problem with trying to grow squash, zucchini and yellow squash and that. It's the, what are they, the borers that?
Yeah.
And so they're in the soil and I think they winter over and it's like 3 years I've had them.
Do you want to take a
No, we can't.
tangent on this?
No, I've been giving up on squashes lately.
So I will, I'm going to outline just a quick plan for the squashes, all right, IPM-wise. This is really important because I think if you're growing summer squash and zucchinis, and maybe even some of the winter squashes, and we'll throw cucumbers in here too. We call these cucurbits, and they have a bunch of pests that are really damaging. And that squash vine borer, all right, it is a, wish I had one here to show you. It's a day-flying moth that looks like a wasp. So it's a beautiful insect. And it flies, it lays an egg at the base of typically zucchini and summer squash are the worst hit. That egg hatches, it burrows into the stem, and it feeds inside the stem. And then eventually the plant collapses, and that larvae would then pupate in the soil and either come out later that summer or the next year, right? It can have 1 or 2 generations per year. So the easiest thing that we can do, and this is kind of tricky because a lot of people don't think really far ahead of time with their squash and zucchini. If you plant transplants, all right, of squash and zucchini, let's just say you're going to do it on May 21st. You're going to plant your little transplant of squash or zucchini in the ground. And when you plant it, you're going to cover it with row fabric. All right? Now, eventually, you're going to see flowers form on that squash. They require pollination. All right? And so at that point, when you start to see flowers, you have to take that fabric off. But when you do that, and we're going to say, oh, it's probably going to be, let's just say it's around June 30th. All right? You're going to plant another crop. So you're going to take the fabric off of one crop because it requires pollination. And you're going to plant your second crop, but you're going to cover it. All right? You are going to harvest from this because it's been protected for approximately 3, maybe 4 weeks before those plants are going to collapse because something's going to get to them. It's just impossible not to. And so you're going to harvest it, wipe it out, and then this crop is going to come along and it's going to start to flower. And as soon as you see a flower, you do the same thing. And this is probably going to be, let's say, around July 15th. All right, so again, you're going to plant, you're going to take the fabric off of this one and grow it and plant another one underneath fabric. And that way you get a continual harvest for the entire summer squash and zucchini season. You never have to use any pesticides, and you'll always have a crop kind of coming along that's protected. Right? It gives you kind of that window. And this works for other squash pests too, including the striped cucumber beetle and the squash bug. And so all three of them fly into your crops. The one really important thing is that you have to rotate where you put your squash in your garden, because the larvae typically survive in the soil where your last crop was. So you have to use some crop rotation. All right?
So that's called succession planting, and we do a lot of it in the garden. It's really important, and the rotation of crops. We literally have my brain power, just my watch just vibrating. Things like basil, lettuce. The succession timing is not just for pests, it's for getting consistent harvest. And I think that's really helpful for disease and pests, but then also like having abundant basil all the way through the season, or having, because this plan, it's more realistic to the reality and the disappointment. I think it's just lowering your expectation and changing your approach and rotating are your keys to success there. Yeah.
And so it's neat. So when you go through that IPM process, that's where you they use the life cycles of the insects to kind of come up with these cultural management plans. That's the whole goal of IPM. And we have them worked out for a lot of pests. Some of them are a little bit more intensive, right? You have to make sure you have the fabric on hand. You got to make sure that you have a way to fasten that fabric down. So it requires more thought ahead of time, but that's kind of why you're here today, is to prepare for the gardening season, make sure you have everything ready to go.
That's the whole idea, right? So that you're ready, feel ready. Has anybody got a lingering question? Because I want to talk about planting. No? Cool. Using this catalog, this is probably the really helpful place to start here. There's disease codes, and there's pest codes that
Does
are really
anyone need one?
helpful. Oh yeah, we have plenty.
2?
What page do you want to do? What page do you want to do?
It's page 3. We're right at the beginning. We're just so we can really look through it.
Anyone else? There you go, yeah.
Abbreviations and symbols is probably one of the places in any catalog I like to start at, because there's like a language to seed catalogs that it's really helpful to understand as you're like in cold winter dreaming mode. The one I like right now is attracts beneficial insects, right? We've been talking about the beneficials going on, and if you want to look up Elysium, you'll see, boom, right next to it, you got pollinator. If you don't have a lot of garden space, you'll see grows well in containers, that little symbol, right? So if you are a patio grower, you want to find things that grow well in containers. Make sense? The crop, once you actually get into a crop, so let's say go to page 5, growing pole beans, right? So there's always more online for Johnny's. They have endless education, but say we're looking at pole beans. Now, disease resistance, right? So high resistance, intermediate resistance. So each variety is going to let you know if it has any disease resistance, or if it's high or low disease resistance. So those are always going to be like your typical diseases for that variety of plant. And I think Johnny's is really good about keeping up on it and really trying to trial new varieties that have more disease resistance built into them.
Can you point out again where you see that disease?
Bottom of page 5 in the corner there. So it's just every crop in Johnny's has this section where it gives you like a little bit of growing that crop's like a little download on it.
And then after every crop name, you'll see those codes. So if it has anthracnose resistance, you'll see the name of the bean and then an A. So you can kind of choose specific cultivars that have resistance to the specific diseases that you might have in your yard.
So the beans that we grow have a high resistance. So we grow the Seychelles pole beans. And it's really cool, this chart at the very bottom, say the pole beans. So optimum germination range, right? So if you are, we're going to talk about starting seeds, so this is a place to pay attention to, is if these are direct seeding, temperature is soil temperature is really the important thing. Don't let that warm, sunny weather fool you, okay? If you are direct seed germinating, pay attention to the soil temp chart down the bottom, because it'll tell you you're gonna have much better germination. It climbs hot as the temperature does, and then it gets too hot and it will go down. So there's like an optimum time for types of seeds. So right now, peas like cool germination. Spinach, they like cool germination. So it's good temperature for them right now. So you always want to think about that, and that chart is really helpful. Is there anything else you can think of to bring up in these, because the sections are, every crop has them. It's so much information, more than you might want, which is why I don't want to overwhelm you, but this is a really great place to sit and look. And
Soak your seeds before you sow them?
no, not unless they instruct me to. I inoculate the peas, which maybe you have better language to talk about the inoculant. Maybe.
Yeah, so whether you need to soak seeds, with a lot of vegetables, the seeds are designed to be fairly easy to germinate. So a lot of vegetables don't require soaking, and they can be, just the soil needs to be kept moist. But that brings up inoculants, and inoculants are really important. So all the legume plants, so legumes are beans, peas, clovers, there's a lot of vetch, some flowers like lupin. These particular plants, they have a beneficial relationship with a bacterium that colonizes their root system called rhizobia. And these rhizobia actually are super awesome because they allow those plants to get nitrogen from the air. So all other plants get nitrogen from the soil. But in this case, that beneficial relationship allows those rhizobia to, our air is 80% nitrogen, roughly. And so it allows them to utilize that nitrogen for growing. And so you want to make sure that you inoculate all those legumes with the rhizobial material, the appropriate one for the crop. You don't have to do it every year. So if you are growing beans and you inoculate your garden once, those will survive. But if you have a new garden or you've done something dramatic with your soil, you always want to make sure you start using it with those inoculants, all right?
Rhizobia are like fungus? Is that?
They're bacterium, yeah. And so they form nodules on the roots of all the legumes, and that's where they do their action. And that provides nitrogen to the plants. It's pretty amazing.
So you inoculate
The seed.
seeds.
Yeah, it's usually a dust material, so you shake it on your seeds and then plant them.
Yeah.
Yep.
We did it in the garden the other day, and just a baggie with a tablespoon of water and the right amount of inoculant, and you just shake it around. It's great. Really easy. One thing I really love about last year, our peas, it does a nice thing for the soil as well. It's like a soil conditioning almost, I think, of peas and beans as sort of like a helper for the next crop too. And so in our intercropping system, like we plant the peas down the middle. And last year, I've never seen peas this tall. They were like, oh my God, like they were collapsing in our trellises. They were so heavy. And then when they're like this big, on the very outside of that same bed, we planted our kale field. So our little starts go in, they're not ready to harvest for weeks. So like having the peas going up and they're ready to harvest, and so we're harvesting and the greens are just getting ready. They're growing, oh, the peas are done. We cut them down, we yank the trellis out, and now we have a full field of kale just ready to go. And we'll be harvesting that within weeks of the peas coming out. And so those intercropping, it's about that timing, like I said. I believe plants do better in diverse communities, and a lot of that is about the soil interactions of, say, a legume versus a kale, and what they need out of the soil. Your pea is not taking the same thing out of the soil as your kale, which is why, another reason why rotation is so important. You cannot grow your tomatoes in the same spot every year. You can't grow your potatoes in the same spot every year. You gotta change things out and you gotta rotate them around. Because they can be actually a beneficial thing for the soil to have those different things pulled out of it. And what we're learning with things like monocropping in regular old tillage agriculture is that the nutrients are just not in the food as much and unavailable. And it's like because we plant the same thing on the same soil and it's pulling the same stuff. So here we are spoon feeding our wheat and our corn and our soy, all these chemical cocktail fertilizers just to get them to absorb the nutrients because there is none left in the soil because it's been depleted over time. And so soils that we were growing these crops on are now 70% less nutrient dense than they were 50 years ago. Yeah, that's not great, but what we're trying to establish in this sort of regenerative, no-till space is that diversity is going to help us in every place we put it. In the soil, in our plant choices, in our pollinator patches. All of that helps the underground space thrive, and I can't talk about that enough, about the beneficial relationships that the mycelium and the root hairs have. I learned a lot this winter about it at NOFA. It was like a deep dive on mycelium and bacterium in the soil. And one of the things I didn't bring up when I talked about soil was as you stop tilling, your soil actually becomes less bacterially dominated and more microbially dominated, which actually helps plants move water and nutrients through the soil much better. And so a spoonful of soil has thousands of feet. What's the number?
I think it's like 1 million.
A million bacteria in mycelium in one spoonful of soil. And so that, literally the mycelium will go like this and handhold a root basically at the tip. And there's an exchange that happens, and it's like a commerce happening where the roots of the plant are saying, here's some sugar, can I have some nutrients? And over here, the mycelium's got its hold on a rock, and it's doing its little chemical breakdown on this rock and bringing nutrients that plant couldn't have gone and gotten itself. And so there's this back and forth and beneficial connective tissue that happens under the soil. The more you don't flip it and expose it to sunlight, the more you keep the soil covered like the forest floor. All of those techniques build those mycelial connections. And having the wood chips for us has been really amazing, because right in between where the bed is and the wood chip area is just white little hairs, and it's not a bad white little hair, it's the stringy, and you can pull it, and if you come to the garden, I get really excited when I find big mats of it. I'm like, come, this is it, we gotta see, because it's that sponginess that holds the water in our Cape Cod soils in the summer that make me not have to turn my irrigation on. That is really nice. I watered 4 times last year, and we were in a drought. So just the water holding capacity of soil like that is important in our climate and our growing, warming, drying climate. So I can't stress that enough. Back to seed catalog and planning. Spacing. Has anybody ever heard of 1-foot gardening? Square foot gardening? So it's this concept that each plant kind of has its own spacing, like that it wants its own space, and that's sort of what you give it. And so you can plan your garden in that way. And I think for some people is a way to sort of plan. It's not how I garden, but it's a way for people to think spatially about how much space a grown plant takes up. Because I think when you're first starting out and you don't know how big a Brussels sprout can get, or you don't understand the spread of a summer squash, you might overplant and you overcrowd and you end up with more disease and pest pressure because there's no wind and there's no movement, and lots of things can happen if you don't know your spacing requirements. And I think that is another good resource in Jony's. You got something? I like it when you pick up the marker. I'm like, what's he gonna do?
Spacing is, when you get into the world of intercropping and spacing, there's a lot that can be done. So it takes a long time to kind of build that kind of information. So a really important detail for a lot of gardeners is taking notes about like what worked and what didn't work, so that you can get those times so that you can do your peas and then get your kale so that you can match that up in the same space. That is how you can really maximize your vegetable garden. It takes a long time to work out those little bit of details, so make sure you're taking notes diligently. And then looking at the spacings. I go around to a lot of community gardens in the summer, and my favorite thing to look at is tomatoes. And I would say that 90% of the tomatoes that I see are never planted on a proper spacing pattern, and that leads to a bunch of issues. So make sure you're paying attention. Yeah.
Speaking of tomatoes.
Yeah.
I've grown tomatoes 3 times in our backyard, and I've never eaten a single one because the birds eat them the very second that they ripen. Do you know any fixes of that?
More netting?
There's a lot of options, but bird netting is probably one of the simplest and easiest things to consider.
My parents' birds have figured out how to get under the netting.
Yeah, you got to have it tight to the ground. So that is actually a neighbor behind my house. I saw them over this fall. They built their garden and they built a wire cage around their entire garden, including the top. And that top was for things like that, tomatoes, so that crows love to eat tomatoes. And yeah, so.
Yeah, and they just take a bite too. They don't even eat, they don't just eat one. It's like, groundhogs are the same way, yeah. Yeah, we ended up with an electric fence at the garden finally because we had a family of groundhogs and it was really hard to watch. It's just like pounds and pounds of tomatoes. Always in the section of the catalog, right? Plant spacing is there. It does bring it up. So if you're like, squash, how big is it? It's always going to give you sort of that plant spacing to think about. And I do like Jony's because they're doing really cool things. Like if you went to the cabbage section, they will give you recommendations on different spacing if you want to develop a mini cabbage. So with spacing, you can shrink what you end up with. So I bring up spinach a lot. So baby leaf spinach is grown tight. The seeding is tighter, which means there's plants that are tight competing for nutrients, and so they don't get those big spinach leaves. You get those big, thick spinach leaf off different varieties, right? I was gonna say it. There's different varieties for baby leaf and big leaf production, but if you take that big leaf production seed and you grow it tight, a lot of times you're gonna get that baby leaf variety type because you're straining it with the spacing. And when you want big leaf spinach, you spread them out more like a lettuce because they'll go big. And like cabbages, Jony's developed several varieties that they find when you plant tighter together, you get a smaller, more family-friendly size cabbage, right? And so this year we're trying that out at the service garden because we've never grown cabbage for them before, and we'd love to see the clients like this having fresh cabbage. So things like that where spacing's important, timing's important. What else? I'm trying to think. Make sure we don't miss it. Questions about spacing, timing?
I just purchased, I haven't put it up yet, but this wire teepee, I guess you would say.
so that I could grow things in the middle, growing up the sides. Is that gonna work for like, it'll work for cherry tomatoes, it'll work for cucumber?
Cucumbers and beans, they'll wind themselves. The cherry tomatoes, you're just gonna have to tie up. And
What about peas in the middle?
peas climb, yeah. Yeah.
Expands my space enormously.
Vertical growing is like a huge thumbs up for me. If you come to any of my gardens, you will see we use hog panel trellises, which you can get at Tractor Supply. They're really rigid but flexible. And so you can make these gorgeous, strong hoops. And we have, because I have an older crew volunteering with me a lot of the time, I really wanted to make sure that the picking was happening at a standing as much as possible. And so our green beans, our cherry tomatoes, peas are all trellised upright. The tomatoes are all trellised upright. And so if you can grow up, grow up.
Close to your building, you had a trellis with these delicious, like almost black tomatoes.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what kind they were? 'Cause
I think they were indigo cherry drops or something. They were like indigo drops, I think. Johnny's might have that one. You should look in there. Johnny's might have that variety, actually.
Wouldn't that be a good time to talk a little bit about tomatoes and how you manage them?
Yeah, because of this, right? We lead into,
Yeah.
should I do this and then?
Do that first. Yeah.
Okay. Talk a little bit about seed starting, and because one of the things to get to is the tomatoes, right? Is a lot of us are growing for tomatoes. And I like to avoid plastic as much as possible. If you ever like to buy a little gadget, I highly recommend a small set of soil blockers. So if you take starting soil, you can make little tiny blocks to start your seeds in. And then when they get a little bigger, you make bigger blocks that are about the same size as a cell of a 6-pack. And so in here, you fill these trays with the big blocks. And these guys that are grown up with their little seeds, they pop right in. You see the square on the inside? It's a receiver. And so the transplant shock with these is really, really low. Because when you think about a plant in a plastic pot, it just winds and winds and winds. As soon as it hits the plastic, it doesn't stop. It goes in a circle, right? And when you find a root-bound anything, that's transplant shock is going to be pretty big no matter how you do it or how gentle or how great you are. So to avoid transplant shock, you want to get your plants in before they're root-bound. So there's a happy point at which these work awesome. And it's just too long in a pot, they get root-bound. But with these, there's air all the way around from the gapping. Just enough gap to where the roots just stop. And they bulk in different ways, but they don't go like this as much, which creates the transplant is just going straight in. You're not popping it, the roots aren't as exposed, and so they're kind of popping right in. Highly recommend if you can. If not, we get 4 or 5 seasons out of these. I'm very much like, be nice to my pots, please don't crush them. And there's always a few volunteers that are a little rough and they're all crushed at the bottom. And we try and teach the techniques to help make that not happen so we get multiple seasons. Some of the biggest, most important tools in my life is a label, which if you've mixed up your seeds or not known, it's frustrating. If you have a Venetian blind, you'll never need to buy tags ever. This is a cut up Venetian blind that was all torn, and I got it at the dump, and I cut it into strips. So don't buy labels. Fans. When your seeds are germinating, almost the most important thing is wind. Not overwatering and wind. So I forgot to bring a fan because I thought you guys could visualize a fan. Having wind on your starts, prepares them for the real world, and it has the plant create more growing hormone. Like it sturdies it up in a way. Like it creates the cells that you want it to grow and make stronger base of growth for your whole season. So if you've ever had those leggy tomatoes that just sort of want to hang like that, that's because the wind was lacking. Moving on to tomatoes. Yeah.
Want to move on to tomatoes?
Yeah.
So how many of you are growing tomatoes? All right. It tends to be one of like the most popular vegetable gardens. And so I always like to, everyone always wants to know a little bit about growing tomatoes. So we're gonna spend some time talking about it. So, you know, one of the things is starting the seeds, and you need to start the seeds at the right time. How many people are starting their own tomato seeds this year? Just a couple? How many people have already started them? All right. So I would say that like right now is the ideal time to start your tomato seeds. Generally, we're looking for like a 6-week-old transplant. I think the back of every seed packet will say 8 weeks, but if you've ever grown an 8-week-long tomato transplant, you end up with one of those leggy, weak plants. So we try to cut some time off of it, 6 weeks, and you'll end up with a little bit better plant. So you got that. You're going to start your seeds. I often started mine on April 8th and figured that they would go in the ground somewhere between May 15th and May 30th, all right? So the classic date for putting a tomato in the ground on Cape Cod is Memorial Day weekend. And that's when soil temperatures reach approximately 60 degrees. That's the goal of that. And if you're a gardener, you're always looking at the forecast. And so, well, what happens? Well, maybe we have a beautiful stretch of weather that starts in mid-May. And so maybe you can get a little jump and get them in as early as maybe the 15th or so. But it's really a forecast thing that you have to look at the forecast, find when that great weather is, and then plant them. And people always say, bury your tomato plants. Generally, you don't have to do that unless you have a bad tomato transplant. All right, the idea of burying it deep and then piling soil up around the stem. So they are able to produce roots from their stems, adventitious roots, but they don't necessarily like that. It's just something that people often do to overcome really poor quality plants. So if you have a nice stocky plant, you had a fan on, you started them at the right time, you're going to plant your tomatoes in the ground. And so planting design for tomatoes, they should be in rows. So, and those rows should be probably 5 or 6 feet apart, okay? That's a really important consideration because if you've grown tomatoes, you know that in a rainy year, they get a lot of disease. And the only way to really keep disease off of them culturally is to keep the foliage dry. And by orientating them in rows, you get air movement on either side of the plant, right? So I know a lot of commercial folks, when they grow tomatoes, they grow their rows so they can drive a pickup down the middle of them, right? So they're using 8 to 10 feet, sometimes 12 feet between the rows. But in a home garden, you're going to want the space between your rows to be between 5 and 6 feet. That's a lot. What I often see people do is that they plant a bunch of tomatoes and they're all 3 or 4 feet apart in a block. And what happens? By the end of the season, there's absolutely no airflow because it's just a block of foliage. All the plants are touching. So you're going to do it 5, 6 feet apart, and then you're going to plant your plants in that row fairly close together. So as close as 12 inches, all right? Maybe as far apart as 24 inches, depending on the types that you're growing, all right? And then you have the choices. Well, what types are you growing? Are you growing indeterminates or determinates? Has everyone heard that terminology before? So an indeterminate tomato is one that grows like a vine. It never stops growing. And we grow them typically on a trellis, or some people will put them in a cage, but typically on a trellis. And then there's determinates, and they grow, and their growth stops at a point, right? And so they're not vining, they're more bushy. If you're growing, so you planted your tomatoes, let's just use indeterminates now for the example, because a lot of home garden varieties are indeterminates. I like to use a trellis. And so the trellis that I use has posts and then a wire that goes across the top, typically to a dead man, all right? And then my tomato plants are planted here, and then I drop a string down and twist the tomato around the string as it grows. All right, so what is that? Let's see if I can draw a tomato plant here. Here's the ground, here's your roots. Tomatoes are really cool. So tomatoes have leaves, right? And if you've grown tomatoes, you know that in every axil, leaf axil, there's a bud, right? Is everyone familiar with these? Sometimes we call these suckers, right? And so when you grow an indeterminate tomato variety, you typically remove all the suckers from every axil, right? So you have just one stem. Right? If you're growing an indeterminate variety, no, that is a determinate variety, you often will not prune them, and you let those shoots develop into additional shoots. Now, some people, and a lot of folks that I work with, they will remove those suckers, even on a determinate, up to the flower cluster, the first flower cluster, which occurs at the 8th leaf. And then they'll let it go. So they'll desucker all the way up to the first cluster, and then let the plant go in a determinate variety. And determinate varieties, they can be grown, they're not typically grown on a trellis like this. We typically put determinates either in a cage, or we use a system known as the Florida weave. And this is where you have posts, and then you use typically baling twine or something to manage the plants in a fairly tight row by weaving back and forth between each plant and then around the post and then weaving back forth. I generally don't suggest that people use stakes. Right? A lot of people like to use tomato stakes and then tie the plant. But almost any other system is better and more friendly to your plants than stakes. So big cages, trellis, or the weave are far preferred.
And tomato cages are better for eggplant and pepper. They're so heavy eventually that like a windstorm in a cage can just go sideways, unless it's a determinant. Cool, but that I've made that mistake before.
A tomato in pot, I've taken big pots and planting a tomato.
Yeah, look for patio varieties, all right, because they're adapted to growing in containers.
And they'll be listed. There's some good ones in Jony's. They have developed for patio growers that develop really nice fruits on a stocky little guy.
It's an important note about that tomato cage. They often sell these
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. Those ones, use those for peppers or eggplant. If you can get the straight square or like round, the ones that are just.
You need one like this for tomatoes, all right?
Yeah.
Big and wide, 2 feet, maybe 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
Nothing that is cone-shaped and short.
An eggplant, they all top off eventually. You know, and that's about where the top of that cone is. It's actually quite nice for those, but like the tomatoes keep going a lot of the time, and good wind. We use the Florida weave, and we like 1.5 foot spacing, and we prune all of the determinants. Same thing, we prune up for a while, and then we stop. A big reason I talk about the pruning up for us is that we don't do 5 to 6 feet in between our row. We have 4 feet in between our plants, probably, which way our wind goes, somehow it works out. But even this year, in our rotation, our fields rotate clockwise. And so this year, my tomato field was gonna be in the coldest, shadiest field. And I had to make a call to like not do that. You know, I knew how bad it would be because that just one field over from last year, and it's that much of a difference. And it really does, the disease is just, you're fighting it anyway, but a lot of times that pruning, lower, especially young, it stops any splash up from the soil. So tomato diseases tend to overwinter and exist and blow in and then live in the soil. And so any That's why mulching is super important, nice and thick around the bottoms of tomatoes, because that any soil splashing up and hitting those leaves just gives that the start it needs. And so as you prune those leaves up, you end up with this straight stalk. And for me, I then intercrop basil underneath that because the leaves are high enough up now in our pruning that I feel like the basil isn't going to negatively affect the airflow, because I'm always thinking about airflow in the field, like you said. I mean, we heavily prune most of the season. So at the very last month and a half, we'll stop and just let them all go. And even the cherry tomatoes, we cut the suckers until it gets tall enough to where it's not going to fall backwards and it's going to go over the right way on the trellis, and then it locks in and doesn't. We use tomato clips now, which has been nice just for the volunteers. It's just quicker, and we get most of them back to reuse. That feels cool. Earlier, I was looking for this because I wanted to show you sort of how we start seeds in our greenhouse. And it's a good way for, say, a homeowner to start a few seeds. If you know, you probably have limited space under your lights or your mats, right? Like, it's not like you have endless space. So for me, in my greenhouse, I treat it like I have a limited amount of space because it fills up quite quickly, and we do. I know how many plants I need for each planting, and so I have to make sure I have enough on the benches. So what I do is I germinate them in mass like this, and then I use a super high-tech butter knife, the tools of the trade. And these guys are so easy to handle, and they're pretty resilient. And these are what I put in here. And this ends up meaning that every cell in here is guaranteed plant. And what that means is everything on that heat mat, you're actually heating soil with a plant in it. And so I highly recommend, if you're limited on space, either Dixie cups or any recycling, mushroom containers, literal anything you can turn into a starting spot like this. I also do things like this, where I'm I was testing the seed pack to see if it was any good, and it was great. And now I have all these lettuces. So if anybody wants to take a handful of lettuces home, I brought these for you. But this is one of those things, same thing, right into the tray. And this is what we're doing with our volunteers all the time right now. It's like the greenhouse is crazy. So just as an example of a way we like to do it to save space.
It can also save you money on seed because you get to transplant, and generally you'll get every plant, right? When you, some people will compensate and sow directly into cells, but then because there might not be 100% germination, they might put 2 or 3 seeds in there and then kill 2 of the 3 plants, right? And so that costs you a lot more in seed, and seed has gotten really expensive in the last 5 years, 6 years. But if you do it this way, you're gonna transplant into each cell, so you won't be losing anything on seed.
Yeah, you can come up and look. I also brought some bare root strawberries to show people. I don't know, if you don't plant strawberries, I don't know what's going on. You need to get on that. Strawberries are one of my favorite things to intercrop in the world because you can't ever have enough because everything wants to eat your strawberries too. And I use them as a garden edge thing. I plant them everywhere. And nook here, nook there, I stuck strawberries in. And it becomes quite sweet to just be able to wander around and eat strawberries.
Love
I mean,
it.
what are we doing this for, really? Questions about tomatoes?
You guys have a greenhouse to start everything. What if you don't have a greenhouse and you want to start seeds,
Sunny window.
sunny windows?
A sunny window is going to get you pretty far. Lights are great, heat is great, but your house is pretty warm. And if you got a sunny picture window and you can get the timing and you can get stuff moving through, because soon enough we're going to be able to plant lettuces out. It's going to happen quick. And so that space will be moving through. But a small grow light can help. A metro rack and a light, and you're on your way.
I know for myself, I had a boiler room in my house in the basement, and it was somewhat walled off. And so that room stayed really warm because the boiler was in there during the winter. And I literally just set up one of those, a 6-foot table like this, and then took fluorescent shop lights and made a rack that I could move up and down with those fluorescent lights. And I could actually move thousands of plants through that table in a fairly quick time all spring, just with that setup. And it was very cheap. I had like a 1-tray heat mat, so I could kind of like cycle different trays off of that heat mat. And then the lights were just cool white fluorescence. So cool white's the ideal grow.
And how many hours a day?
So you always want to be over 12. So I would suggest if you're doing like tomato seedlings or things like that, 14 to 16 hours is what you turn them on for, all right? And yeah, you can do a lot of plants in a very small space. And then, you know, the fluorescent lights need to be close to the plant material. So what's close? 6 inches from the tops of the foliage, all right? LEDs might be a little bit different, but they're still quite a bit more expensive than fluorescents at this point.
It seems like, you know, if you have a small garden, that you're wasting a lot of seeds and seed packets, you know, because you get so many seeds. Did you ever think about like having some seed sharing? I mean, seeds are so expensive and you could divvy those up.
Is there a seed library you found?
We're working on some seed library. West Falmouth Market's very interested in a seed library. I believe they started one. I think every community should probably have one. I brought a ton of seeds to give you today, given to us by seed catalog companies and other. This Feed and Grain donated a whole box of last year's seeds. Community resources is definitely the way to go if you can share seeds with people. And if you don't feel like you can use the whole pack of seeds, try and see if somebody wants to split it with you. Or, you know, I think sharing is caring. And maybe you start the tomatoes and you start the peppers. You know, maybe you guys, it's working together to kind of make it happen is, I think, the best way to get through anything.
So I know I used to buy a lot of seeds. My dad used to buy a lot of seeds, and he had another friend that was a big gardener, and we each took like one company catalog and ordered seeds, and then we shared them all just between the 3 of us to kind of cut down on, because it can get really expensive really fast. You know, a packet of tomato seeds with 10 seeds in it can be $6 these days, and that's crazy if you ask me. But the only way that you can do that is kind of spread out those costs for different people. And a lot of towns and a lot of libraries have a seed library, so on the Cape. So check that out. It's a place where you can share seeds, but also get seeds.
Mm-hmm. Any questions about anything that we've touched on? Anything you feel like we might have missed?
How long do seeds last? And do they last year after year?
They all have different shelf lives. It really depends.
Yeah, I'll share with you this. If you're doing onions, buy new onion seed every year, all right? Most of the other seeds, I keep tomato seeds for as long as 6 or 7 years. Just try to keep it in a cool, dry place, cool and dry.
And what about propagating your own? Like what if you just, you know, take the seeds out of the tomato from the supermarket?
Check out our YouTube channel. We did a seed saving workshop with Josh Levesque last year, and he did tomatoes, and it's up online. We have a YouTube channel, if you don't know, so like are filming now, so that we can keep anybody who can't make it to these things. We still want the education to be out there. So there's lots of me being silly and up talking to you about stuff, and other people, and orchard professionals. We have a grafting workshop coming up that we usually video. So we have this library online that you can access. Yeah, Patricia?
Jenny, can we,
I'm going to do events next. Yes.
events?
Yes. I'm going to announce events and Farming Falmouth-esque stuff because I wanted to get right into it because we had a little timing thing on the invite and I wanted to make sure we got through all this stuff. But in case you don't know, Farming Falmouth became a land trust last year. We bought our first farm property. It is now in agricultural protection. Part of it is a full conservation protection, but that's in the woods. And we are developing the property and hosting events and inviting the community to come out. We run a program called the Service Garden. That is my main project that I run, and that is in 2 locations now because we have the patch. We expanded our field over to the patch, which is by the high school. It's on Locust Field Road. And then our main service garden field is at the town-owned Tony Andrews farm in the back by the community garden. And that's where most of our growing fields are. If you feel like you want more hands-on in any of this, we are like starting the season this week. So if you're interested in coming and volunteering with the service gardeners at all, we grow over 60 different varieties of plants, herbs, and we are doing everything we've been talking about. And so if you want to learn more about our trellising, like come, we'll be hanging up the peas in probably 4 weeks and doing the Florida weave and showing you, which can help you learn how to maybe do your tomatoes. Or there's lots going on, and there's always something for everybody. And I say that seriously. Our 88-year-old volunteer named Bob is such a diehard. He comes with his walker, his stool, and his water, and he picks cherry tomatoes standing, and then he sits to pick the rest. And then when he's tired, we put him in the shade, and he's like happy to clean onions. There's always something. Like yesterday, Sally's 84. She was in the greenhouse with us, and she was sorting onions. Like the plants, because some are just piddly, and we don't want to prioritize them. So she's just sorting. There's always something to do for every skill and every energy level. And the schedule is 7 shifts a week. So there's a few evenings, a few days. And everything we grow gets donated to the Falmouth Service Center and the Cape and Islands Veterans Center. So everything's donated. And we track every pound. Last year, on our 1/3 of an acre, we grew 9,400 pounds for donation. 1/3 of an acre. Some people have yards that size. So I just want to point out that that's a lot of food that your family and you could be growing in your front yard if you had such a 1/3 acre space lying around. And this year we are shooting for 12,000 pounds because we're crazy. No, because I think we can do it. Because every year we get tighter, our poundage goes up, and our soil looks better. And yesterday we were broad forking, and like every time I'm interacting with that soil, I get excited. It is so beautiful. I hope you come and see it and understand kind of what we're going for. There's a link to sign up on this if you want to check it out, get on our email list. It sends you basically a message every Friday telling you like what's going on in the garden, gives you an ability to sign up for a shift. And then you just come and join whoever signed up for that shift in particular. We have a couple other, we're having homestead hangout nights on the 2nd and 3rd Friday of every month at the patch. And what that is our 50 by 50 homestead field, which is like very diverse, even more diverse than the service garden. It's more focused on home production scale. So we're talking sauce for tomatoes. Tomatoes for sauce. We're making kimchi. We're doing spring carrots, but we're also doing fall carrots. We're doing spring potatoes, but we're also doing fall potatoes. We're doing Three Sisters row to kind of talk about that. We're growing popcorn because why not? Growing dry beans because why not grow your protein, right? These are crops I'm really interested in people growing at home because they store well, they increase your food security, and that's what I am all about. I'm a paranoid veteran that got into food, and all I want to do is make everybody feel safer in their own world, and food in proximity makes me feel safe, and a community that's educated in food makes me feel even safer. More people doing it, the better, right? That we all can support each other. Homestead hangouts, 2nd and 3rd Fridays, 7 shifts a week for the rest of the season. So if you have questions, come with them, bring water. Our regular email list, so you're probably on it if you got the message to come here. So I'm assuming, but if you're not on it, or if you just want to sign somebody else up. We have an event coming up this week. I knew it. Oh, where'd it go? Where'd it go? I put it here. Where did I put it? Here. Yep. Wednesday. This week, Elsbeth Hay she does the local food report for WCAI, if you've ever heard her. She just wrote a book called Feed Us with Trees. She's doing a book talk that evening, but that day at the Patch, she's doing a cooking demo with acorns. So if you want to check out the Patch, if you want to meet an author and learn something really cool about a sustainable protein carb option here in the Northeast, it's going to be really fun.
That's at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. And there are other ways to volunteer with us if you don't have as much time or if you're interested in other things. We have a little brochure about how to volunteer with us. We're always looking for help in all sorts of realms because we're trying to grow. We have one more community conversation happening. I don't know if anybody's keeping up on our food needs assessment and sort of the food future of Falmouth idea. And we've had 3 of these 4 conversations, and they're surrounded around this conversation. So 200 pages of what Falmouth's food system looks like. Don't worry, we put it into a packet for you. It's much more digestible. So we got these 5 key recommendations that came out of the 200 pages, right? So those recommendations are what we're focusing on in these info sessions, and info session's the wrong word. We're not giving you info, we're asking you to come to the table and help us come up with solutions to implementing food-forward policies, supporting growers and producers, investing in local supply chains, ensuring equitable access to food, and enhancing food education. If any of that tickled your heart, come to our next session and try and get involved if you have bandwidth to help us with any of those initiatives. Because what we're trying to say is we are a tiny organization that's young, but there is a lot to do. A lot to do to make sure everybody has access and farmers can purchase land and that people can learn to be farmers and make money off of it, and then you all get healthy food and local healthy food. Because you know who's probably not going to raise their prices as much as local farmers. We feel bad. Like, we actually feel bad because we directly interact with our customers. So yeah, our fuel prices went up, yeah, but we still feel it. We're not a big multinational corporation that doesn't see the customer and doesn't care about the customer. So farmers markets just became a lot more affordable, if you ever thought that was a thing. Please support your local farmers in these times. And I hope to see you at some of our events. Yeah.
Do you ever send some of these things to the farmers market so
We're,
we actually eat them?
oh, what?
I mean,
Oh, the food?
you actually do a farmers market, you have people purchase your vegetables versus the Falmouth Service Center.
Everything we grow in the service garden is donated.
Donated, okay, like the farmers markets?
No, to the food pantries in town. So the service center is our biggest pantry, and they serve anybody who needs, no matter what. And so they have fresh produce flowing in their doors 4 days a week right now because of some of our programs. So we send food on Mondays from our service garden, and they send that out Tuesday and Monday. And then Wednesday, our gleaners drop off gleaned food from a local farm called Pariah Dog Farm. People just go and pick their extra produce and then bring it and drop it off. And then the farmers market donates, all the farmers donate produce on Thursdays that they give out. And so 4 days a week of fresh organic produce.
And if you're a home gardener and you have surplus produce, you can donate through farmers market into a program we call Share Your Bounty.
So
And it's aggregated with what the farmers also contribute, and that goes to the service center.
yeah.
So if you suddenly find yourself with too many zucchinis, please bring your extra cost to the market.
Yeah, and so Patricia actually, during COVID, we thought about this because we saw everybody getting really into gardening and we were like, oh my God, the zucchini. And we knew everybody who was just getting into gardening was gonna have extra of stuff. And then we saw the need of the food, people needed help because of their jobs and whatever, right? So we decided that was a place for us because we stay represented at the farmers market because we support growers and we're trying to get more information about our programs and our education. And so we're there. And Patricia came up with this idea, well, like, what if we just have some coolers and we encourage home gardeners to come? And that turned into all the 3 community gardens now have a cooler and a representative that drives their cooler over to us that they also donate. So it's this huge community effort to make sure people are fed and fed well. Because how do you go to work and show up for life if you're not even fed well? So I think food is the access that we need to give everybody regardless. And so I think that's why I'm in this work and why I hope you engage our food programs and help out if you can here or there. We're flexible. If you can only come for an hour, show up. We love it. It's okay. You're not late. An hour is an hour, and we will take your power. Not, you know how I meant it. Any other questions, comments?
Good job.
Yeah?